Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into the life of someone who went from the most popular princess in England to one of history's most infamous monarchs,
Mary the First.
Mary the First, better known as Bloody Mary.
Yeah,
You wanted to go beyond the scary stories and understand the woman behind that chilling nickname.
right.
So we dug into a podcast that covers Mary's fascinating and often misunderstood life.
I think what's really interesting is how Mary's life story challenges our assumptions about good and evil.
Oh, absolutely.
We often like to put these historical figures in these neat categories.
Right.
But the reality is much more nuanced.
And Mary the First is a perfect example of that complexity.
Oh, for sure.
The podcast described her entrance into London after her half-brother Edward VI died.
Right.
Imagine thousands of people lining the streets, cheering her name, genuinely thrilled to welcome their new queen.
Yeah.
It was a remarkable display of popularity.
Yeah, and it really highlights just how dramatic the shift in public perception was during her reign.
Yeah.
She went from being celebrated to being reviled.
It's a stark contrast.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you had this image of this beloved princess, the rightful heir, finally taking her place on the throne.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the Bloody Mary of legend, the queen, who burned hundreds of Protestants at the stake.
Right.
So how do we reconcile these two seemingly opposing figures?
Well, to understand this transformation, we need to look at the context of Mary's life and the forces that shaped her reign.
Okay.
Mary was born into a world of intense religious and political upheaval.
Yes.
Her father, Henry VIII, had broken from the Catholic Church
Right.
and established himself as the head of the Church of England.
Right. Henry VIII's desire for a male heir and his tumultuous love life really shook things up in England.
Oh, absolutely.
And Mary, as a devout Catholic, found herself at odds with her father's actions.
Right.
The podcast really emphasized the impact of these early struggles on her personality and beliefs.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Mary's early life was marked by trauma and uncertainty. She was declared illegitimate when her father annulled his marriage to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, to marry Anne Boleyn.
Wow.
Imagine the emotional toll that took on a young girl.
It must have been devastating.
Yes, and to make matters worse, she was pressured to renounce her Catholic faith
Oh, wow.
and acknowledge her father as the head of the church.
Right.
This was a direct attack on her core beliefs.
Yes. It was forcing her to choose her faith or choose her family, choose her conscience or choose her safety.
Right.
It's clear that this early experience shaped her deep-seated distrust of others
Yeah,
and her unwavering commitment to Catholicism.
absolutely. And it really laid the foundation for her later actions.
Right. So these early challenges forged a steely resolve in her character.
They did.
But how did this impact her later decisions, particularly those that earned her the Bloody Mary label?
Well, it's important to remember that Mary came to the throne after a period of Protestant rule under her younger half-brother, Edward VI. He and his advisors had pushed for radical religious reforms, moving England further away from Catholicism.
So from Mary's perspective, she wasn't just taking the throne, she was reclaiming England for the Catholic faith.
That's right.
She saw it as her duty, her mission to undo the damage she believed had been done.
Precisely. And this sense of religious duty played a significant role in her decision to execute Protestants.
Right.
She saw heresy as a threat to the salvation of souls and believed it was her responsibility to eradicate it.
Now, I know for many of us, the idea of executing someone for their religious beliefs is unthinkable.
I agree.
But the podcast pointed out that in the 16th century, this was a common practice across Europe.
It was.
Both Catholics and Protestants persecuted those they deemed heretics.
Absolutely. That's a critical point that's often overlooked in discussions about Mary.
Yeah.
While her actions were undoubtedly brutal, they were part of a broader historical context.
Okay.
We can't judge her solely by modern standards without considering the religious climate of her time.
So the question becomes, why does Mary get singled out as Bloody Mary when other monarchs, like her father and her half-sister Elizabeth the Lion, also executed people for religious reasons?
That's a question historians have grappled with for centuries,
Right.
and there are several factors at play here.
Okay.
First, the timing of Mary's reign was significant.
Okay.
It fell right in the middle of this intense religious tug-of-war between Catholicism and Protestantism.
Uh-huh.
Her actions became symbolic of the broader conflict, feeding into the fear and animosity that fueled the religious divide.
It's like she became the poster child for Catholic persecution,
Exactly.
even if she wasn't necessarily more brutal than her predecessors.
That's right, and we can't underestimate the power of storytelling.
Right.
After Mary's death, a Protestant historian named John Foxe published Foxe's Book of Martyrs.
Okay.
This book, with its graphic descriptions of Protestant suffering under Mary's reign, became a bestseller and shaped Protestant views of Mary for generations.
It's amazing how one book can have such a lasting impact on our perception of history. It's a reminder that history is often written by the victors, or at least by those who control the narrative.
Absolutely. And in Mary's case, the narrative that emerged painted her as a cruel and tyrannical queen.
Right.
This image of Bloody Mary has persisted for centuries, overshadowing the more nuanced realities of her reign.
But before we delve deeper into the events of Mary's reign and the complexities of her legacy,
Okay.
let's take a closer look at the path that led her to the throne.
Right.
It was a journey filled with challenges and unexpected turns that would ultimately shape her destiny.
It was. Mary's path to the throne was anything but straightforward.
It really was a testament to her resilience we left off, with her facing immense pressure to conform to her father's religious reforms. How did she navigate that precarious situation?
Well, she held firm to her beliefs.
Oh.
Even when it meant risking her own safety, this unwavering faith became her defining characteristic and ultimately a source of strength.
It's fascinating how what could be seen as a weakness, her refusal to bend to the prevailing winds, actually became her greatest asset. It garnered her the loyalty of the people who saw her as a symbol of resistance against her father's often tyrannical rule.
That's a great point. Her unwavering faith resonated with many, particularly those who remain Catholic at heart, despite the official shift to the Church of England when Henry VIII died and Edward VI took the throne. The religious landscape shifted even further toward Protestantism.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The young king and his Protestant advisors aimed to solidify England's break from Catholicism, pushing for even more radical reforms.
Right.
But Edward was a sickly boy and his reign was short-lived.
He was.
Sensing his impending death, his advisors devised a plan to alter the line of succession, bypassing Mary, who was a devout Catholic.
It was a bold move, a calculated gamble to secure a Protestant future for England. They chose Lady Jane Grey, a distant relative, and a devout Protestant as the new heir.
So they attempted to rewrite history, to erase Mary's rightful claim to the throne, all in the name of religion. What was Mary's response to this blatant power grab? Did she simply accept her fate?
Absolutely not. Mary was a fighter, remember? She refused to back down. She rallied her supporters, many of whom had remained loyal to her and the Catholic faith, and challenged the legitimacy of Edward's will.
It sounds like a scene straight out of a historical drama.
It does.
Two women vying for the throne,
Yes.
each representing a different religious faction, each with their own claim to power. What tipped the scales in Mary's favor?
Public opinion played a huge role. The people had witnessed Mary's unwavering strength in the face of adversity. They admired her for standing up for her beliefs, even when it meant defying her own father. And let's not forget that many still held strong Catholic sympathies.
So it wasn't just about who had the legal right to the throne, but who had the hearts and minds of the people. Mary's steadfastness and her connection to the Catholic faith ultimately won her the crown.
Precisely. The Privy Council, sensing the tide turning in Mary's favor, quickly switched sides and declared her the rightful Queen of England. It was a triumphant moment for Mary, but it also marked the beginning of a turbulent and ultimately tragic reign.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? She fought so hard to reclaim her birthright to secure the throne, only to face a reign riddled with challenges and controversies.
Her victory was hard-won, but ruling a nation divided by religion, especially in such volatile times, proved to be a Herculean task. One of her first major decisions as queen, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences, was her choice of husband.
Yes, the podcast really delved into the complexities of her marriage to Philip of Spain. Let's talk about how this decision, driven by both personal desire and political strategy, ultimately added fuel to the fire of public discontent.
Mary, in her late 30s, was acutely aware of the need for an heir to solidify her dynasty and ensure the continuation of Catholic rule in England. She chose Philip, a powerful Catholic ruler and the son of the Holy Roman Emperor.
On paper, it might have seemed like a strategic alliance, a way to strengthen England's position on the European stage, but this decision was met with significant resistance from her own people, wasn't it?
Yes, the English people were deeply suspicious of this foreign match. They feared that Philip would gain undue influence over England, potentially turning it into a Spanish puppet state. Anti-Spanish sentiment was already high, and this marriage fanned the flames of discontent.
This is where Mary's unwavering determination, the same trait that helped her secure the throne, might have worked against her. She seemed determined to push forward with the marriage despite the growing public disapproval.
Her commitment to her goals, both religious and dynastic, often led her to make decisions that alienated her subjects. This clash of wills between a queen determined to pursue her vision for England and a populace fearful of the consequences created a volatile atmosphere.
And it's within this atmosphere of mistrust and fear that Mary's most controversial actions, the executions that earned her the moniker Bloody Mary, take place. It's a dark chapter in English history, one that continues to spark debate and scrutiny. Let's delve into the reasons behind these executions and explore how they fit into the broader religious context of the time. So we've been talking about Mary's controversial marriage to Philip of Spain and the growing tensions in England. It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It's certainly created a breeding ground for unrest and rebellion. Mary's actions to restore Catholicism, coupled with the fears surrounding her marriage, ignited a powder keg of resentment.
The podcast mentioned the Wyatt Rebellion as a direct consequence of these anxieties. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the Wyatt Rebellion was a serious uprising aimed at deposing Mary and preventing the marriage to Philip.
Wow.
It was a clear sign of the deep-seated opposition to Mary's policies and the fear that England was losing its identity under the influence of Spain.
So this wasn't just a minor protest, it was a full-blown attempt to overthrow the queen.
Exactly. It was a pivotal moment in Mary's reign.
Yeah.
It demonstrated that her grip on power was far from secure and that she was facing serious challenges from within her own realm.
How did Mary respond to this rebellion? Did it force her to reconsider her approach, or did it solidify her resolve?
Mary, true to her character, met the challenge head-on. She crushed the rebellion with decisive force, demonstrating that she would not tolerate any threats to her rule.
This seems to be a recurring theme in Mary's life, facing opposition and responding with unwavering determination.
You're absolutely right. Mary was not one to back down from a fight, whether it was defying her father, claiming her rightful place on the throne, or quelling rebellions. This iron will was both her strength and her weakness. It allowed her to overcome incredible obstacles, but it also contributed to her increasingly authoritarian approach to governance.
And it's during this period of unrest and rebellion that the executions of Protestants begin those actions that would forever brand her as Bloody Mary. The podcast stated that around 300 Protestants were burned at the stake during her reign. These acts of persecution are impossible to ignore.
You're right, these executions were a brutal reality of Mary's reign. However, it's crucial to remember the historical context. While we may view these actions as horrific today, in the 16th century, the concept of religious toleration was virtually non-existent.
So burning people at the stake, while shocking to us, was a common form of punishment for heresy at the time.
Yes, both Catholics and Protestants engaged in the persecution of those they considered heretics. It was a brutal chapter in European history, fueled by religious fervor and political machinations.
The podcast also mentioned that Mary's father, Henry VIII, and half-sister Elizabeth of Ethos, executed far more people during their reigns, yet they don't carry the same stigma as Bloody Mary.
That's a complex issue with multiple layers. As we discussed earlier, timing played a crucial role. Mary's reign coincided with the peak of religious tensions in England. Her actions therefore became more deeply intertwined with the religious conflicts shaping the narrative surrounding her reign.
So it's possible that Mary's actions were magnified because they occurred during a period of heightened religious sensitivity.
Precisely, and we can't overlook the impact of propaganda. John Fox's Book of Martyrs, published shortly after Mary's death, presented a highly influential and graphic account of the Protestant martyrs who suffered under her rule. This book solidified Mary's image as a ruthless persecutor of Protestants.
It's remarkable how historical narratives can be shaped by accounts that may not be entirely objective. It reminds us to always consider the source and to approach historical accounts with a critical eye.
Absolutely, and while the executions cast a dark shadow over Mary's reign, it's important to acknowledge that there were other facets to her rule. The podcast highlighted her efforts to stabilize the English economy and strengthen the Navy, recognizing her contributions beyond the religious persecutions.
It seems that Mary's legacy is one of stark contrasts. A devout Catholic who thought to restore her faith, a determined ruler who faced down rebellions, a woman driven by a vision for England's future, and a queen whose actions led to the deaths of hundreds of her subjects. It's a complex and often unsettling story.
Indeed, and it's a story that continues to fascinate and challenge us today. Mary was a product of her time, a woman shaped by the religious and political turmoil that engulfed her world.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Mary the Custis' life and legacy, I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of understanding historical figures within their context. We can't judge the past solely through the lens of our present-day values.
Exactly. History is messy, complex, and often filled with contradictions. By delving into the lives of those who came before us, we gain a deeper understanding of our own humanity with all its flaws and complexities.
Well said. And if you're fascinated by these journeys into the past, hit that subscribe button. We'll keep bringing you these deep dives into history's most intriguing personalities. You never know what you'll uncover next.